The small town of Elmsbury was once known for its dense woods, sprawling meadows, and calm natural beauty. Nestled on the outskirts of a major city in the southeastern United States, it had long been a peaceful escape from the urban hustle and bustle. However, that was before the construction boom. In recent months, the town's serene landscape had been marred by cranes, bulldozers, and the noise of development. New residential complexes were springing up everywhere, and the land that had once been home to thick forests, streams, and small wildlife was rapidly becoming a concrete jungle. The signs of progress were visible everywhere, but the locals, particularly those who had lived there for years, weren't sure how to feel about it. Some embraced the change, seeing it as a sign of prosperity. Others, like Emma, felt uneasy. Emma was 22, a student majoring in environmental science at the nearby university. She had always felt a deep connection to the natural world. Growing up in Elmsbury, she spent her childhood days wandering the woods, marveling at the intricate ecosystems she encountered. Her fascination with the delicate balance of nature had only deepened during her years at university. Now, though, she felt like something precious was slipping away as construction slowly overtook the town. One afternoon, Emma walked out into her backyard to find the familiar sight of heavy machinery across the street, tearing down trees and leveling the ground for a new development. She had heard the rumors. The construction was moving in fast, and the developers were eager to build as quickly as possible. But what struck her the most was something far more disturbing. As she stood there watching the chaos unfold, Emma saw the unmistakable mound of an ant mound, a large, bustling, and complex structure that had stood there for as long as she could remember. But now, it was under threat. A bulldozer was heading straight toward it. The driver, seemingly unaware of the existence of the colony beneath the ground, continued his work, pushing forward without hesitation. Emma felt a jolt of panic rise in her chest as she rushed to the street. The ants that had once called the mound home were now scattered, displaced by the machinery, their tiny bodies crushed beneath the giant wheels of the bulldozer. She ran toward the destruction, but by the time she reached the site, it was too late. The mound was gone, obliterated in the name of progress. She stood there in shock for a moment, her heart sinking. The delicate balance of life she had always cherished seemed to be crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Hey, are you all right?" a voice called out from behind her. It was Matt, the site supervisor for the construction crew. He was in his 30s, a hard-working man with a practical, no-nonsense attitude. Emma turned to face him, her anger bubbling over. "You just destroyed a living, breathing community. Do you realize how much life was in that mound? All those ants, gone, just like that." Matt raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her outburst. "Look, I understand you're upset, but it's just a bunch of ants. We're working here, trying to get this development done. We have schedules to meet." Emma shook her head, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "It's not just a bunch of ants. It's a whole ecosystem. Do you have any idea how important those ants are? They play a crucial role in the soil health, plant growth, and so much more. What you've done isn't just destructive. It's part of a bigger issue. You're tearing down the very fabric of nature." Matt sighed, his expression softening. "I get it. You're passionate. But there's nothing I can do about it now. The project has to move forward." Emma felt a surge of frustration, but she knew it wouldn't do any good to keep arguing with him. She watched as the bulldozer moved away, its job complete, and the mound, along with its residents, was lost forever. Her heart ached, but there was one thing she could do. She wouldn't let the ants' destruction be in vain. She would save what was left of them, if possible. With determination in her eyes, Emma made her decision. She would try to help the surviving ants. She couldn't bring the mound back, but maybe she could create a new home for them. That night, she gathered some small boxes and began to collect what she could from the site. There were fragments of the original mound, pieces of wood, and earth that still contained ants, though many were injured. She carefully placed them into the boxes, making sure to preserve as many as she could. It wasn't much, but it was all she could do. The next day, Emma began constructing a new home for the ants in her backyard. Using her knowledge of ecosystems and ant behavior, she set up a small artificial garden with the hopes of creating a new colony. The ants she had gathered would be the nucleus of this new environment, a new home, far from the destruction they had faced. Emma felt a sense of urgency and hope as she worked, knowing that this would be a long-term project. But she was determined. She wouldn't let the ants community die without a fight. As she worked, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the destruction of the ant mound was just the beginning of a much larger problem. The town of Elmsbury, like so many others, was facing a crossroads. The need for development was clashing with the need for conservation, and Emma knew that if things continued on their current path, there wouldn't be much left to save. But for now, all she could do was focus on her small, quiet effort. As she placed the last of the ants into their new home, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all it takes to begin making a difference. This is the beginning of Emma's journey, and her struggle to find balance between the natural world she loves and the rapidly changing world around her. Over the following weeks, Emma became more and more absorbed in her mission. The small garden in her backyard, which she had originally envisioned as a temporary sanctuary for the displaced ants, slowly began to evolve into something much more complex. She had spent hours researching how to create an optimal environment for them, everything from the type of soil they preferred to the kinds of plants that would support them. At first, it seemed like the ants weren't adapting. Many of them wandered aimlessly, not sure where to go or what to do. They were still disoriented from the trauma of their destruction. Emma spent hours every day observing their behavior, making small adjustments to the layout of the garden, hoping to encourage them to settle in. She had even taken to speaking to them, as though they might understand her. There was something comforting about the quiet, focused work of it all. Yet, despite her best efforts, Emma began to worry. The colony wasn't thriving. There were far too many ants for the small setup she had created, and it was clear that she hadn't been able to fully replicate the complexity of the mound they had once called home. The artificial garden was too small, too basic. Even though she tried adding new tunnels, mounds of dirt, and bits of wood to simulate the environment they were familiar with, the ants continued to struggle. One afternoon, as Emma was checking on the garden, she noticed something troubling. The ants seemed to be scattering more than usual. They appeared disoriented and agitated. She knelt down to examine them closer and found that some of them were, in fact, dead, overwhelmed by the stress of relocation. She sat back on her heels, feeling a sinking sensation in her chest. She had failed. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't save the colony. She had been so focused on recreating their environment that she had lost sight of the bigger picture. What the ants needed wasn't a mere replica of their old home. It was something far more intricate and balanced, something that couldn't be reproduced in a few months of work in her backyard. The realization hit her hard. She had done what she could, but it wasn't enough. That evening, Emma found herself walking aimlessly through her neighborhood, her mind heavy with disappointment. She passed the construction site, now barely recognizable as the area where the ants had once lived. All that remained was a flat, barren stretch of land, ready for the foundations of the new apartment complex. There were no signs of life here, just concrete, steel, and dust. As she walked, Emma couldn't help but notice the silence around her. The usual hum of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant buzz of insects, all of it seemed absent, replaced by the harsh, mechanical sounds of construction. It felt as if a part of the town's soul had been lost in the process. She turned a corner and found herself standing in front of a small cafe where she often met with friends. Louise, a close friend of hers, worked there. Louise was older than Emma by a few years, and while she shared her love for nature, she often took a more cynical view of the world around them. Emma pushed open the door, the familiar jingle of the bell above the door sounding like a tiny comfort. Louise waved at her from behind the counter, a faint smile on her face. But when she saw the look on Emma's face, the smile faded. "Rough day?" Louise asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Emma nodded, sinking into one of the seats at the counter. "I don't know anymore. I thought I could save them, the ants. But I can't recreate what they had. And now I feel like I'm failing them." Louise sighed and leaned over the counter, her voice soft. "Emma, I get that you care about this, but I think you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're trying to fix something that's already gone. Sometimes nature just moves on. Maybe it's time for you to move on too." Emma's heart sank. She wasn't sure if Louise meant to be harsh, but her words stung. "You don't understand," Emma said, her voice quiet. "It's not just about the ants. It's about everything, the whole system. What's going to happen to all the other creatures if we keep destroying their homes? Where does it stop?" Louise crossed her arms, looking thoughtful. "I get it. But you're one person. You can't save everything. You can't stop progress. Look around you. There's nothing you can do to change what's happening here." Emma fell silent, the weight of Louise's words settling heavily on her chest. Louise was right in some ways. Emma couldn't single-handedly stop the rapid development of the town. But she didn't know how to give up either. If she didn't try, who would? The evening passed slowly, and Emma left the cafe feeling even more conflicted. She couldn't just accept that things were the way they were. But how could she keep fighting a battle that felt so much bigger than herself? The next few days felt like a blur to Emma. She spent most of her time in her backyard, trying to tend to the ant colony, but she was losing hope. The ants continued to struggle, and her frustration began to mount. One afternoon, as she was cleaning up the garden, a voice startled her. It was Matt, the site supervisor she had met before. He had come over to the garden to check on her progress. He seemed concerned, perhaps more than she had expected. "How's the ant project going?" he asked with a slight, teasing smile. But Emma could see a genuine concern in his eyes. "I think it's failing," she admitted, her voice heavy. "I just can't create an environment that feels right for them. It's not the same. It never will be." Matt frowned, walking closer to examine the setup. He paused for a moment, then turned to her. "I know I don't understand all the details about ants and ecosystems, but I can see you care. Maybe there's another way." Emma looked up at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking," Matt said. "The construction site. We've still got some untouched patches of land. Not a lot, but maybe if we can figure out a way to preserve those areas, they could be used as a safe haven for the ants. Maybe we can work something out." Emma felt a flicker of hope. Could it be possible? Could there be a way to integrate nature with the ongoing development? "You think that could work?" she asked, her voice filled with cautious optimism. Matt nodded. "I don't know, but maybe it's worth a shot. If we're careful, we might be able to set aside some space for wildlife." The idea was small, tentative, but it was a start. Emma's heart leaped with the thought that there might still be a way to make a difference. Perhaps she couldn't undo the damage that had already been done, but maybe she could help protect what was left. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a small spark of hope. There was still a chance. If she worked together with others, she might be able to protect some part of the natural world amidst the rising tide of development. This marked the beginning of a new phase for Emma. It wasn't just about saving the ants anymore. It was about finding a way to create a future where progress and nature could coexist, even in a world that seemed increasingly driven by concrete and steel. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. The idea that Emma and Matt had discussed, about preserving some green spaces amidst the development, slowly began to take shape in her mind. It wasn't a solution to all the destruction, but it was a small step, a chance to create a pocket of nature within the ever-growing concrete jungle. They agreed to meet with Ryan, the head of the construction company, to discuss the possibility of setting aside part of the land for wildlife preservation. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, but Emma couldn't shake off the sense of urgency gnawing at her. Days passed, but Emma couldn't stop thinking about the potential impact they could make. She had grown used to the chaos of construction sites, the endless machinery and the noise. But now, for the first time, she saw the potential to change the direction of this development, to carve out a piece of nature that might just survive the encroaching urban sprawl. Still, doubt lingered at the back of her mind. Would Ryan, with his focus on deadlines and profits, be willing to listen? Was there even room for compromise? When the day of the meeting arrived, Emma arrived early at the office of Ryan's construction company. She had prepared a presentation, a simple visual proposal showing the benefits of maintaining natural habitats for wildlife, including the ants that she had been working so hard to protect. The idea was to show that even a small patch of land could have a lasting impact on the ecosystem. Matt arrived shortly after, and the two exchanged nervous glances before entering the meeting room. Ryan was already seated at the table, a professional but somewhat stern-looking man in his early 40s. He glanced up as they walked in, offering a brief nod before motioning for them to sit down. "So, what's all this about saving green spaces?" Ryan asked, folding his arms across his chest. "I've got a lot on my plate, so let's make this quick." Emma tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had to be clear, concise, and passionate without sounding too emotional. After all, this was a business decision for Ryan. She cleared her throat and began. "Well, Ryan, as you know, I've been working on an initiative to protect the natural environment here, especially the ecosystems that are being disrupted by the construction. There's a lot of potential here for something unique, a green space integrated into the development. The idea is to preserve a small portion of the land for wildlife. It doesn't have to be large, but it would serve as a safe haven for the species that live here, like the ants I've been working with." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Ants? You're really asking me to save a few bugs? I get it that you're passionate, but I'm not sure how that's going to help us move forward with the project." Matt chimed in, sensing Emma's growing frustration. "It's not just about the ants, Ryan. This could be a long-term investment in the environment. Think about how it could add value to the development. It could be something unique, an eco-friendly feature that would attract buyers and make the property stand out in a market that's becoming increasingly concerned with sustainability. Ryan shifted in his chair, his expression unreadable. He wasn't easily swayed by such arguments, but Emma could see a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. She decided to press on. Look, I understand that this is a business decision, but think about the long-term benefits. By preserving even a small section of land, we can help maintain biodiversity. We can create something that adds value to the community while still meeting the needs of the development. This wouldn't just be a patch of land. It would be a living, breathing ecosystem that could help maintain the health of the environment around it. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. I'm not convinced yet, but I'll consider it. I'll take a look at your proposal and think it over. I'll get back to you. Emma felt a mix of relief and frustration. She hadn't expected an immediate yes, but the uncertainty of Ryan's response left her feeling unsettled. As they left the meeting, Matt placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, Emma. It's a step in the right direction. At least he's willing to think about it. Emma nodded, though the doubt still lingered. But what if he decides it's not worth the trouble? What if he doesn't see the value in it? Then we keep pushing, Matt said, his voice firm. You've got a good idea here, and if it doesn't work with Ryan, we'll find someone else who gets it. But don't give up just yet. This is just the beginning. Emma tried to take comfort in Matt's words, but the uncertainty of the situation remained. She couldn't help but feel like she was fighting against forces far more powerful than herself. After all, the construction project was already underway, and every day that passed meant more trees felled, more wildlife displaced. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this battle was about far more than just saving a few ants. It was about protecting the world she had always known from being irreparably altered by unchecked progress. As the days went on, Emma continued to work on her proposal. She reached out to local environmental groups, trying to garner support for her cause. She wanted to show Ryan that this wasn't just a lone effort. It was part of a larger movement towards sustainability and conservation. She even began organizing small community meetings, inviting people to come and discuss the importance of protecting the natural world in the face of rapid urbanization. Meanwhile, Matt continued to advocate for her within the construction company. He kept checking in with Ryan, gently nudging him toward a decision, but the answers were always the same. I'll think about it, or let's see what the numbers look like. Frustration began to build as the weeks went by. It wasn't enough that she had fought for the ants. Now Emma was fighting for a larger vision. She was fighting for the very future of her town. One evening, as she was returning home from a meeting with an environmental group, she saw something that made her heart stop. A bulldozer was parked near the edge of the construction site, and a group of workers was gathered around, preparing to clear out more trees. Stop! Emma shouted, running toward them. You can't keep doing this! The workers looked up in surprise, and one of them, a man she recognized from the site, took a step toward her. What's the problem? There's still wildlife here, Emma protested, her voice shaky but determined. You can't just destroy everything in the name of progress. These creatures have nowhere else to go. The worker shrugged. That's the job, lady. We've got to clear this land. Emma's frustration boiled over. She had been trying to work with the construction team to find common ground, but it felt like every effort she made was being ignored. This wasn't just about the ants anymore. It was about something larger, the future of the natural world in the face of unrelenting development. You don't get it, she said, her voice trembling. You're not just tearing down trees. You're tearing down lives, entire ecosystems. And soon, there won't be anything left to save. The worker gave her a dismissive look before turning back to his task. Emma stood there for a moment, watching as the bulldozer roared to life, ready to tear into the earth once more. As the machine began to move, Emma felt a surge of helplessness wash over her. But then, as if on cue, she saw Matt approach from across the site. He had seen what was happening, and his face was a mixture of determination and frustration. I've been talking to Ryan, Matt said as he reached her side. He's agreed to set aside part of the land. It's not much, but it's a start. Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of disbelief and relief. You mean it? You've convinced him? Matt nodded. Yeah, we've got a green light to preserve a section of the site for wildlife. It's not everything we wanted, but it's something. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a victory. a small, hard-won step toward creating a balance between progress and preservation. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. She had allies, and together, they had made a difference. The fight was far from over, but as Emma walked away from the construction site that day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was still much work to do, but now, for the first time, she felt like the future might just have room for both the city and the wilderness. As the days passed, Emma couldn't help but feel a mixture of triumph and apprehension. While she had succeeded in convincing Ryan to set aside part of the land for wildlife, there was still so much work to be done. The space they had secured wasn't large, and the developers had made it clear that it was meant to be a token gesture to appease local environmentalists. In their eyes, it wasn't anything more than a small patch of green that would hardly make a dent in the overwhelming push for urbanization. But for Emma, it was a sign that maybe, just maybe, she was on the right path. Matt had been her most vocal supporter through the entire process, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for his unwavering belief in her cause. He had kept working behind the scenes, nudging Ryan and other decision-makers, ensuring that the idea didn't get lost in the shuffle of deadlines and budgets. But as Emma spent more time on the project, she began to realize that her task wasn't simply about saving a patch of land. It was about changing the way people thought about progress in nature. The patch of land that had been set aside for wildlife preservation was located near the southern boundary of the construction site. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Emma a foothold. She began planning the integration of the green space into the larger development, hoping that this small success could lead to more widespread efforts in the future. To start, she enlisted the help of Grace, the elderly neighbor who had become an unexpected ally in her mission. Grace had lived in Elmsbury for over 50 years, and her love for the land was undeniable. She had seen the town grow from a sleepy village into a bustling suburb, but she had also witnessed the toll that unchecked development had taken on the natural environment. Grace was an outspoken advocate for preserving the town's remaining green spaces, and she eagerly agreed to help Emma with her project. The first step in their plan was to create a habitat that would attract local wildlife, starting with the ants that had first sparked Emma's mission. She knew that to establish a viable ecosystem, she would need to create conditions that mimicked the environment of the original ant colony as closely as possible. This wasn't an easy task, especially with limited resources, but Emma was determined. She spent hours each day collecting materials, soil, leaves, twigs, and rocks from the surrounding area. She even reached out to the local garden centers for donations of native plants and flowers. Emma wanted to make sure that the green space wasn't just a sanctuary for the ants, but also for a variety of other creatures. The more diversity in the ecosystem, the better the chances of long-term success. As she worked, Emma found herself growing more connected to the land. There was something incredibly grounding about the process of creating something from nothing, of nurturing life where it had been displaced. She worked side by side with Grace, and the two women often spent hours chatting about the history of Elmsbury, the changes they had seen, and the future they hoped for. Grace's wisdom and experience were invaluable to Emma, and she came to see her as a mentor, someone who understood the challenges of balancing progress with preservation. One morning, as they were working in the new wildlife area, Matt arrived with good news. Ryan's agreed to add some more features to the green space, he said, his face lighting up with excitement. It's not much, but we're getting a small pond, a few more trees, and some benches. It'll be open to the public once the development is finished. It's a start, Emma. A real step forward. Emma felt a rush of relief wash over her. It wasn't the large-scale preservation project she had dreamed of, but it was more than she had expected. She had made a tangible impact, and that was something worth celebrating. As the construction site continued to move forward, Emma and Grace worked diligently to cultivate the wildlife area. Over time, the small patch of land began to take shape, slowly transforming into a vibrant, living ecosystem. The plants began to flourish, and the soil became enriched with the organic matter Emma had worked so hard to gather. It wasn't perfect, but it was thriving. One afternoon, while Emma was tending to the plants, she noticed something that made her heart race. There, in the newly formed dirt mounds, were the ants. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, scurrying in and out of the tunnels she had created. It was a sign of hope, proof that her efforts hadn't been in vain. Emma crouched down beside the mound, watching as the ants moved with purpose, rebuilding their colony in this new home. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. She had given them a place to thrive, a place to call home. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a sense of peace. The destruction of the original ant colony still haunted her, but seeing them return, even in this new form, was a reminder that life had a way of adapting, of finding a way forward. The wildlife area continued to evolve, and soon, other creatures began to take notice. Birds flitted among the trees, and small mammals began to explore the area. The entire ecosystem was coming together, each species playing its part in the delicate balance of life. It wasn't perfect, but it was a testament to what could be accomplished when people worked together to make space for nature. The news of Emma's project began to spread through Elmsbury. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers came to visit the green space, curious to see what had been created. Many were surprised by how much life had returned to the area. Some even stopped to thank Emma, acknowledging the impact she had made on the community. One afternoon, as Emma was walking through the green space, she spotted Louise sitting on one of the new benches, gazing out at the pond. Louise had always been skeptical about Emma's efforts, but now, Emma noticed a different look in her eyes, one of admiration. "You did it," Louise said, standing up and joining Emma on the path. "I wasn't sure at first, but this is incredible. You've really created something beautiful here." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "It's not just me. It's all of us. We're all part of this." Louise nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to understand what you were trying to do all along. Maybe there's more to progress than just building. Maybe we can build something that actually enhances the world around us." As Emma walked alongside Louise, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The path ahead was still uncertain, and there were many more challenges to come, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was part of something larger than herself. The green space wasn't just a physical location. It had become a symbol of hope, of what could happen when people refused to give up on their ideals. It was proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change was possible. It wasn't about saving every single ant, every single tree, or every single creature. It was about creating a space where life could continue to thrive, no matter how small. And in that moment, Emma realized that this was just the beginning. There was so much more she could do, so much more to fight for. The battle wasn't over, but she no longer felt alone in the struggle. Together with Matt, Grace, Louise, and the rest of the community, she knew they could continue to make a difference, one small step at a time. As Emma stood there, looking out at the growing wildlife area, she made a silent promise to herself. She would keep fighting, for the ants, for the trees, for the wildlife, and for the future of Elmsbury. This was her home, and she wasn't about to let it be lost to the demands of progress. She would build a future where nature and development could coexist. She would make sure of it. The development of Elmsbury was accelerating. Tower cranes loomed above the streets, and the hum of construction equipment never seemed to stop. Emma had grown accustomed to the noise, though it was hard to ignore the constant reminder that her town, her beloved home, was transforming in ways that often felt irreversible. Even the small green space she had fought so hard to preserve seemed insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But despite the progress that surrounded her, Emma couldn't help but feel like she had accomplished something important. The wildlife area, which was slowly but surely taking shape, had become a sanctuary of sorts, a patchwork of life amidst the ever-growing sea of concrete. People were noticing it now. They came for walks, sat by the pond, and marveled at the trees and plants that had begun to thrive in the space Emma had worked so hard to cultivate. But she knew that the real battle wasn't over yet. The green space was small, and its survival was far from guaranteed. Ryan, the head of the construction company, had come to visit the site a few days ago to see the progress. He had been cautiously supportive, but made it clear that the development project remained the priority. "We'll keep this area, Emma," he had told her, "but it's not going to grow any bigger. We've got a plan for this space, but we're not going to turn the whole project into some kind of nature preserve." Emma had agreed, but inside she felt a knot form. Ryan's words, while pragmatic, revealed a deeper truth that she hadn't wanted to face. She had succeeded in securing this small piece of land, but as for anything beyond that, the fight for Elmsbury's future felt like it was only just beginning. Her concerns were confirmed when she received an invitation to a town hall meeting. The local government had called for a public discussion about the development of Elmsbury, and from the tone of the invitation, it was clear that the project was nearing its final stages. Emma knew what this meant. A decision would soon be made about whether the development could proceed as planned, or if changes would be implemented to account for the green spaces and the wildlife that inhabited them. The meeting took place in the town hall, a large building that had once been the heart of the town, but now seemed to be a relic of a bygone era. Inside, the room was packed with townspeople, most of them older residents who had lived in Elmsbury for decades. They had witnessed the town grow from a quiet rural area into a sprawling suburb. Emma could feel the tension in the air. The stakes were high, and the fate of the town's future seemed to hang in the balance. The first few speakers were supportive of the development, touting the economic benefits and the promise of new homes and businesses. The developers had promised jobs, better infrastructure, and an overall improvement to the town's economy. For some, the idea of progress was synonymous with prosperity, and they were eager to see the project go through. But then, Emma stood up. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the front of the room. She had prepared a speech, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt inadequate. She wasn't just fighting for the green space she had secured. She was fighting for the future of Elmsbury itself, the future of a town that had once been defined by its connection to nature. "My name is Emma," she began, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger as she continued. "And I've been working on a project to preserve part of the natural environment here in Elmsbury. There's a small patch of land near the construction site that we've set aside for wildlife, a place where animals, insects, and plants can thrive amidst the development. I know it's small, but I believe it's important, not just for the creatures that depend on it, but for all of us." The room was silent, and for a moment, Emma felt a wave of doubt. Would anyone listen? Would they understand? Progress doesn't have to mean the destruction of everything we hold dear. We don't have to choose between development and nature. We can have both. We just have to be willing to make space for the things that matter. For the birds that used to sing in the trees, for the insects that pollinate our gardens, for the wildlife that we share this earth with. She paused, looking around at the faces in the room. Some seemed skeptical, others disinterested, but there were a few who nodded in quiet agreement. Emma pressed on. "I'm not asking for a complete halt to development. I understand the need for growth. But we can't ignore the fact that this town's identity is tied to the land. It's what makes Elmsbury unique, and if we don't take a stand now, we may lose that forever." She finished her speech, her heart racing. She wasn't sure if she had made a difference, but she felt a small sense of pride. She had said what needed to be said. Now, it was up to the people in this room to decide. The meeting continued with more voices from both sides. But as the discussions unfolded, Emma began to notice something. More and more people were speaking in favor of preserving the natural areas, even if it meant slowing down the pace of development. There were those who acknowledged the need for progress, but also understood that unchecked growth could lead to the loss of something far more valuable. After several hours of debate, the town council finally spoke. The mayor, a stern woman in her 50s, addressed the room. "We've heard your concerns, and we understand that this development is a sensitive issue. Our priority is to balance the needs of growth with the preservation of the qualities that make Elmsbury special. After much discussion, we have decided to move forward with the project, but with one important caveat. We will designate an additional area for wildlife preservation. This will include the green space near the construction site, as well as other areas that will help mitigate the impact of development on the environment." The room erupted into applause. Emma felt her heart leap in her chest. It wasn't the full-scale preservation that she had originally hoped for, but it was a significant victory. The town had acknowledged the importance of nature, and for the first time, Emma felt like her voice had been heard. Ryan was there too, standing near the back of the room with his colleagues. He caught her eye and gave her a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was a silent acknowledgement of her efforts. As the meeting came to a close, Emma found herself surrounded by a group of people who had been inspired by her words. Some of them were longtime residents of Elmsbury. Others were newcomers who had recently moved to the area. They all shared one thing in common. They cared about the future of the town, and they were willing to fight for it. The victory at the town hall wasn't the end of Emma's journey, but it was a major turning point. She had succeeded in getting the town to recognize the importance of balancing progress with nature. There was still much work to be done. More green spaces to protect, more projects to advocate for, and more people to convince. But Emma now felt that she was no longer fighting alone. She had made a real impact, and with the support of the community, she knew that the future of Elmsbury could be something truly special. A place where nature and development could coexist, where progress didn't have to come at the expense of the environment. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Emma felt like she was on the winning side. The months that followed the town hall meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Emma's victory at the meeting had set the wheels in motion for significant changes in the way Elmsbury would handle future developments. The town council had officially committed to preserving more green spaces in the development zone, and the construction project had been altered to include several ecological preserves. It wasn't the sweeping change she had initially envisioned, but it was a start, a step in the right direction. Emma had become something of a local hero, though she never saw herself that way. She remained humble, always redirecting attention to the community's collective effort. But the recognition felt good. For the first time in her life, Emma felt like her work mattered in a real, tangible way. Her passion for nature was no longer just a quiet personal hobby. It had become the foundation for something larger. With the town's decision to preserve more green spaces, Emma found herself with a new role. She became a liaison between the construction company, the town council, and the local environmental groups, ensuring that the plans for Elmsbury's development were aligned with sustainability goals. It was a challenging role, but one she embraced with determination. After all, there was still so much more to be done. In the weeks that followed, Emma continued to work on the small green space she had helped create near the construction site. She and Grace spent hours planting native species, monitoring the growth of the plants, and ensuring that the habitat was thriving. The wildlife area had started to show signs of success, and more animals were moving in. Birds perched on the trees, while squirrels darted playfully across the ground. But most importantly, the ants had returned, larger colonies of them, rebuilding their homes in the soil, thriving in the environment Emma had worked so hard to create. But it wasn't just the small wildlife area that was changing. Emma's vision was starting to spread. People were becoming more interested in sustainable living, and local businesses began to adopt eco-friendly practices. There was a new sense of awareness in Elmsbury, a desire to preserve what was left of the town's natural beauty while embracing the inevitable growth that came with progress. It wasn't long before Emma was approached by a larger environmental advocacy group, which had taken notice of her efforts in Elmsbury. They invited her to join their team, offering her the opportunity to expand her work on a broader scale. The thought of leaving her beloved town was difficult, but the chance to influence policy and advocate for green spaces across the state was an opportunity Emma couldn't ignore. She knew that if she truly wanted to make a lasting impact, she needed to take her fight for nature beyond Elmsbury. One evening, as she sat in her small garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emma thought about everything she had accomplished. The wildlife area near the construction site was flourishing. The community had come together to support the preservation efforts, and Elmsbury had become a model for how development and nature could coexist. She had done what she set out to do. She had given the ants and other creatures a chance, and in doing so, had sparked a larger movement that could one day change the way people thought about development. But there was still so much more work to be done. While Elmsbury had made strides, the battle to preserve nature was ongoing. Other towns, other cities, were facing the same challenges. How to balance the needs of development with the imperative to protect the environment. Emma realized that her work was far from over. One afternoon, Matt called her. It had been a while since they had spoken, as Emma had become more involved with the environmental group, but they had stayed in touch. Matt had become a trusted ally, someone she could count on when things got tough. He was still working with the construction company, but now, his role had expanded to include environmental oversight in the company's projects. "Emma, I think you need to come by the site," he said, his voice serious. "There's something I want you to see." Curious but cautious, Emma agreed to meet him. When she arrived at the construction site, she was surprised to see a small crowd gathered near the green space she had helped create. People were standing around, talking and taking pictures. It wasn't unusual for people to visit the space, but this felt different. Matt was standing nearby, gesturing for her to come over. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her gaze scanning the crowd. Matt smiled, but there was an air of excitement in his demeanor. "You're going to want to see this." He led her toward the center of the green space, where a small plaque had been installed. It read, "In honor of the ecological restoration efforts led by the community of Elmsbury, preserving the balance between progress and nature. This space stands as a testament to the future we can build together." Emma stared at the plaque, stunned. "What is this?" "It's a dedication," Matt explained. "The town council decided to make the green space permanent. They've agreed to protect it from further development, and they've named it after you. It's your legacy, Emma." Her heart swelled with emotion. She had never expected anything like this. The space wasn't just a victory for her. It was a lasting reminder that communities could work together to create something meaningful, something that would endure long after the construction was finished. The small ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Emma spoke briefly, thanking everyone for their support and commitment to preserving nature in their town. It was a moment of pride for her, but it was also a moment of realization. The fight for nature was not just about fighting developers or the government. It was about the people, the community, coming together to protect the world they all shared. As the ceremony concluded and people began to leave, Emma stood by the plaque, her fingers lightly grazing the metal surface. This small piece of land, this small victory, had become a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose to make a stand. She had shown that one person, one community, could make a difference. And that difference, no matter how small it seemed at first, could ripple out and inspire others to do the same. Emma felt a deep sense of peace. She had always believed in the power of nature to heal and restore, and now she saw the same potential in people. The green space in Elmsbury wasn't just a place for wildlife to thrive. It was a place for people to come together, to reconnect with the world around them, and to understand the importance of preserving it. But Emma knew this was just the beginning. As she walked away from the plaque, she looked out over the land she had helped to preserve, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was so much more to do, so many more battles to fight, but now she was ready. With the support of her community, and with the knowledge that one person could make a difference, Emma was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her legacy was just beginning.